Welcome to Nightmare Narratives, where we bring you the most chilling tales of the paranormal and unexplained. And tonight, we're uncovering a story that blends heartbreak, tragedy, and terror. This is the legend of the Ghost Bride of Winter Lake. Picture a serene, snow-covered lake surrounded by frostbitten trees. It's beautiful during the day, but when night falls, the air grows heavy with sorrow, and the lake's reflection holds more than just the moonlight. Local legends say that every winter, an ethereal bride walks the frozen waters, luring the unsuspecting to their doom. The story begins over a century ago with a young woman named Evelyn Moore, a bride-to-be from the nearby town of Willow Springs. Evelyn was set to marry Thomas, her childhood sweetheart. Their wedding was planned for Christmas Eve, a day symbolizing love and unity. But fate had other plans. On the eve of their wedding, Thomas vanished. Some say he fled to escape the pressures of marriage. Others believe he met a tragic end. Evelyn, heartbroken and humiliated, wandered to Winter Lake in her wedding dress. Witnesses claimed to see her standing on the frozen surface, staring into the distance. By morning, Evelyn was gone, leaving behind only her veil and a trail of footsteps leading into the icy water. Soon after, strange occurrences began. Fishermen reported seeing a woman in white beneath the ice, her face pale, but her eyes open and filled with sorrow. Couples who visited the lake often heard faint sobbing or saw ghostly footprints appearing in the snow beside them. Over the years, countless people have claimed to encounter Evelyn's restless spirit. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a park ranger named Mark. In 1998, Mark was patrolling the area when he noticed a woman in a wedding dress standing near the lake's edge. He called out to her, worried she might fall through the ice. The woman turned to him, her face obscured by a translucent veil. She raised her hand, pointing toward the center of the lake. Mark followed her gesture, but saw nothing. When he turned back, the bride was gone. Moments later, he heard a loud crack and realized the ice beneath him was breaking. He barely escaped, but he swears he heard faint laughter as he crawled to safety. Another eerie story involves a group of teenagers who dared each other to spend the night by the lake. They set up camp and joked about the ghost bride, but as midnight approached, the laughter faded. One of them spotted a figure gliding across the ice, moving too smoothly to be human. The figure stopped and stared at them before vanishing into the mist. The next morning, their campsite was surrounded by a perfect ring of untouched snow, as if someone or something had encircled them while they slept. What keeps Evelyn's spirit bound to Winter Lake? Paranormal experts have several theories. Some believe she's trapped by her grief, replaying her final moments in an endless loop. Others suggest she's seeking vengeance, targeting those who mock her story or disturb her resting place. A paranormal investigation team visited the lake in 2015. Armed with thermal cameras and audio recorders, they captured chilling evidence. Faint cries echoing across the ice and sudden temperature drops despite no wind. One investigator claimed to see a reflection in the water, a woman in a wedding dress, but when he turned around, no one was there. Could Evelyn be a residual haunt, a fragment of emotional energy replaying itself? Or is she an intelligent spirit, aware of the living and choosing to interact? Paranormal investigators remain divided on the nature of her haunting, but one thing is certain. Winter Lake holds an aura of unshakable dread. Now, let's hear from our listeners. We asked you to share your thoughts and experiences related to Winter Lake, and the responses were spine-chilling. Here's one from Jessica. My family used to visit Winter Lake every Christmas. One year, my brother and I saw footprints appear on the ice, leading straight to the center of the lake. We were alone, and there hadn't been any snowfall that day. Another listener, Alex, shared, I grew up hearing the legend of the ghost bride. When I finally visited the lake, I felt an overwhelming sadness, like the weight of someone else's heartbreak. I couldn't stay more than a few minutes. These stories suggest that Evelyn's presence isn't just a legend. It's a chilling reality for those who visit Winter Lake. That's it for tonight's extended episode of Nightmare Narratives. The Ghost Bride of Winter Lake is a reminder that some tragedies leave scars too deep to fade, even in death. Whether Evelyn is seeking closure or vengeance, one thing is clear. Winter Lake is forever haunted by her sorrow. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us, what haunting legend should we explore next? Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. Next story. The Night of the Mari Lwyd. It was a cold, moonlit night in the small Welsh village of Llanwellyn. Frost coated the cobblestones, and the air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and pine. Inside the Hughes family home, laughter and warmth spilled out into the night. The hearth crackled with a roaring fire, and the family gathered around a table laden with spiced cakes, steaming cider, and festive decorations. Little Megan, the youngest of the Hughes children, clutched her woolen blanket and peered out the frosty window. "Mama, is it true that the Mari Lwyd comes on nights like this?" she asked, her voice tinged with both fear and excitement. Mrs. Hughes chuckled, brushing flour from her hands as she prepared another loaf of bread. "Perhaps, Megan, but only if we're lucky. The Mari Lwyd doesn't visit every home, you know. It seeks those who are ready to welcome a challenge." Megan's older brother, Rhys, smirked from his chair by the fire. "Or those who don't bolt their doors tight enough," he teased. Before Mrs. Hughes could chide him for scaring his sister, a sharp knock resounded through the house. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor or the hurried rap of a traveler. This was something else. Loud, hollow, and deliberate. The family froze, the sound echoing against the stone walls. "Who could it be at this hour?" Mr. Hughes muttered, his brow furrowing as he rose from his chair. He approached the door cautiously, lifting the latch with a firm hand. As the door creaked open, a cold gust swept into the room, carrying with it the faint strains of singing. Standing before him was a figure both strange and otherworldly, a towering shape draped in a flowing white sheet, crowned with a bleached horse's skull adorned with colorful ribbons and bells. The hollow sockets of the skull seemed to pierce through the darkness, glinting eerily in the moonlight. Behind the spectral figure stood a group of villagers, lanterns glowing in their hands and smiles on their faces. Leading the group was old Gwyn Davies, the village bard, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "The Mari Lwyd," Rhys whispered, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. Megan clutched her mother's skirts, her eyes wide. Gwyn stepped forward and began to sing in a rich, melodic voice. "Oh, Mari Lwyd. Oh, grey mare bright, here we've come on this cold winter night to challenge your wits, to test what you know. Let us in, or out we'll not go." The family exchanged knowing smiles. They had heard of this tradition, a battle of wits where the Mari Lwyd and her party demanded entry through clever rhymes and verses. The household's task was to respond in kind, refusing entry with equally witty retorts. If the Mari Lwyd bested them, she would enter, claiming food and drink as her prize. Mr. Hughes squared his shoulders, a twinkle of competitive spirit lighting his eyes. He stepped onto the threshold and sang back, his voice steady and clear. "Oh, Mari Lwyd. Oh, spirit bold, your tricks and tales are centuries old. This hearth is warm. Our door is shut tight. No food or drink shall be yours tonight." The Mari Lwyd's party erupted in laughter and cheers. Gwyn was quick to respond with another verse, weaving clever wordplay and sharp wit into his song. The contest continued, back and forth, each side growing more animated and boisterous. Mrs. Hughes joined in, her voice adding a melodic harmony to her husband's verses, while Rhys offered whispered suggestions that elicited both groans and laughter. Little Megan, still clutching her blanket, found herself inching closer to the door, her fear melting into fascination. The Mari Lwyd's ribbons fluttered in the wind, and its bells jingled softly with every movement. Though eerie, the figure seemed less frightening and more magical with each passing verse. After what felt like hours, the Hughes family faltered. Gwyn's final rhyme was so clever, so perfectly crafted, that even Mr. Hughes had to concede. Laughing, he stepped aside and opened the door wide. "Come in, Mari Lwyd," he declared. "You've earned your place at our table tonight. The Mari Lwyd stepped inside, its presence filling the room with an almost tangible energy. The villagers followed, their laughter and chatter blending with the warmth of the firelight. Plates of spice cakes were passed around, mugs of cider refilled, and stories flowed freely. The Mari Lwyd stood in the corner, a silent but striking figure, its ribbons shimmering in the firelight. Megan couldn't resist reaching out to touch one of the ribbons, feeling its silky texture beneath her fingers. As the night wore on, the villagers sang carols, their voices rising in harmony. The Mari Lwyd's presence, though otherworldly, seemed to bless the gathering with a sense of unity and joy. When it was time for the party to leave, the villagers filed out, the Mari Lwyd leading the way. Its bells jingled softly in the frosty air, and for a moment, as it passed under the moonlight, it seemed to come alive, a spectral mare, gliding gracefully into the night. The Hughes family stood at the doorway, watching the procession disappear into the darkness. "Mama," Megan whispered, her eyes shining, "do you think the Mari Lwyd will come back next year?" Mrs. Hughes smiled, pulling her daughter close. "If we're lucky, Megan. If we're lucky." And so, the legend of the Mari Lwyd lived on, a reminder of the magic and mystery that linger in the darkest nights of the year. The last story, The Curse of the Christmas Doll. The snow fell quietly over the little village, blanketing rooftops and cobblestone streets in a soft, shimmering white. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the warm glow of candlelight spilled from frosted windows. It was Christmas Eve, and everywhere, families gathered to share laughter, songs, and stories. But not in the toymaker's house. Hans, the village toymaker, sat alone in his dimly lit workshop. His tools lay scattered on the bench, his hands trembling as he worked on his final creation, a doll, unlike any he had ever made. Its porcelain skin was smooth and pale, its glassy blue eyes so lifelike they seemed to watch him as he moved. The doll's dress was a rich red velvet trimmed with gold thread, perfect in every detail. It was a masterpiece, a labor of love. But Hans's heart was heavy. This doll wasn't just another toy to be sold in his shop. It was a gift for his daughter, Clara. His beloved little girl had been bedridden for months, her once bright laughter silenced by an illness the village doctor couldn't cure. Hans had tried everything to save her, but the treatments failed. His desperation grew until he found himself doing the unthinkable. One cold, moonlit night, Hans ventured into the woods at the edge of the village, seeking the help of a woman everyone else avoided. They whispered about her in hushed tones, calling her a witch. Hans didn't care if the stories were true. He only knew she might be his last hope. The old woman lived in a crooked cottage deep among the trees. When Hans arrived, he begged for her help, pleading for a way to save Clara. The woman listened, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "I can save your daughter," she said at last, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "But the price is steep. Are you willing to pay it?" Hans nodded without hesitation. "Anything," he whispered. The witch smiled. "Then you must give me a piece of your soul." The word sent a chill down Hans's spine, but his resolve didn't falter. "If it means Clara will live, take it," he said. The witch handed him a small vial and instructed him to breathe into it. Reluctantly, he obeyed. As he exhaled, the vial glowed faintly, and Hans felt a strange hollowness within him. The witch took the vial and muttered an incantation, her voice weaving through the shadows. "Pour your love, your grief, and this fragment of your soul into the doll you're making," she instructed. "It will hold the magic needed to save your daughter." Hans returned to his workshop and worked through the night, carving, painting, and sewing with a fervor he had never known. When the doll was finally complete, he felt a strange warmth emanating from it, as though it truly was alive. The next morning, Hans presented the doll to Clara. Her pale face lit up with a smile, the first he had seen in months. She held the doll close, and almost immediately, her color began to return. Her strength grew day by day, and Hans believed the witch's magic had worked. But then, the strange occurrences began. At first, it was small things. Visitors to Hans's home swore they saw the doll's eyes move, following them as they crossed the room. Clara began to talk to the doll, which wasn't unusual for a child, except that she insisted the doll spoke back. Hans dismissed it as imagination, grateful only that Clara was alive and happy. Then the accident started. The baker, who delivered bread to Hans's home, slipped on the icy road and broke his leg. A neighbor who had stopped by to admire the doll fell ill, with a fever no one could explain. Hans himself began to feel a presence in his workshop, an unsettling sensation of being watched. At night, he heard whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, faint but sinister. One evening, as Hans worked late in his shop, he thought he saw the doll's shadow move across the wall. He froze, his heart pounding, but when he turned, the doll sat perfectly still, its glassy blue eyes fixed on him. The realization struck him like a thunderclap. The doll wasn't just alive. It was cursed. Hans tried to rid himself of the doll, but no matter what he did, it always found its way back. He locked it in a chest, only to find it sitting on Clara's bed the next morning. He tried burning it, but the flames seemed to avoid the porcelain and velvet. The doll was bound to him, and to Clara, by the witch's dark magic. Over time, Hans grew more and more paranoid, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by fear and despair. Clara, too, began to change. She became distant, her laughter replaced by long, eerie silences as she clutched the doll to her chest. One night, Hans disappeared. Some say he fled the village, unable to bear the curse any longer. Others believe the doll claimed him, dragging him into the darkness it carried. Clara was found in her bed, pale and lifeless, the doll still cradled in her arms. The villagers buried Clara and locked Hans's workshop, leaving the doll behind. But that wasn't the end. Over the years, the doll reappeared, turning up in antique shops and estate sales, passed from owner to owner. Each time, it left a trail of tragedy and misfortune. Fires, sickness, unexplained accidents. Wherever the doll went, chaos followed. Some say the doll is still out there, waiting to be found. Its porcelain face remains unblemished, its blue eyes as captivating and cursed as ever. So, this Christmas, if you ever find a doll under your tree, take a good, hard look at it. And if it seems too perfect, too lifelike, maybe, just maybe, it's best to leave it unopened. Thanks for joining me for this chilling holiday tale. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, rate, and share with your fellow mystery lovers. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and maybe avoid any strange-looking dolls this Christmas.